Dear friends and fellow progressives, welcome to Berlin.
Welcome after the break. I'm happy to see you back in this room. A quick reminder, in the forum there is a matter of fact session in the boardroom from concept to campaign, and here we will be talking to Paths to Enlargement, a democratic and capable European Union in a changing geopolitical landscape. This session will be chaired by the FEPS Vice President, Uwe Optenhögel, and I would also like to let you know that after this session there will be no break, and we will reconvene here, or actually we don't have to reconvene, we will stay here for the final session. But before that, let's talk about the path to enlargement. Uwe, the floor is yours.
So, yeah. I think we should all go. Yeah.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Tudor.
Anna. Hi.
Well, good morning, everybody. We're happy that the Berlin weather hasn't kept you from coming. I would like to start with a little survey, asking you before we start the panel. And it's an easy question. I would just like to ask you to raise your hands to the question. Do you think that the results of the European election, of the recent European elections, will make enlargement easier? Or do you think it will make enlargement more difficult? Who thinks it will make enlargement easier? Please raise your hands. Who thinks it will make enlargement more difficult? So, I mean, this is a quite clear statement, and we see if we take it up and how we take it up later in the debate. Now, our topic is Path to Enlargement, a democratic and capable union in a changing political landscape. My name is Uwe Optenhögel. I'm from FEPS. A think and do tank, I would say, in Brussels, which is kind of an umbrella organization of social democratic think tanks in the European Union. Let me first briefly introduce to you our speakers. I start to my right side with Ruxandra Ivan. She's a state councillor, or was a state councillor to the Prime Minister of Romania, and is currently more on the academic side.
No, it's the other way around.
The other way around, at the University of Bucharest. No? Then we have Anna Lührmann, Minister of State for Climate and Europe in the Federal Foreign Office in Germany. Then we have Ambassador Tudor Ulianovschi, yeah, I hope I expressed it right, former Minister of Foreign Affairs in Moldova, and a very experienced diplomat in multilateral affairs, different assignments. I don't dare to name them all. Next to Tudor, we have Tiago Antunes, who until recently was the State Secretary of European Affairs in the Costa government. And Tiago, I think at the moment you're active at university again. But I think you know Anna from your government businesses where you probably work together on many occasions. Last but not least, a freshly elected MP to the European Parliament, Thijs Reuten from the Dutch New Party, yeah, a merger of the Partij van de Arbeid and the Greens. Maybe this is some inspiring idea. But this is not what we want to discuss. So congratulations to your re-election, Thijs. So that will be our panel. Now let me do some brief remarks, I think enlargement is back on the agenda of the EU, not because the EU was so enthusiastic about it, but because of shifts in the international system, namely the Ukraine war. Because enlargement, again, is seen as a means to possibly stabilize the eastern neighborhood of the current European Union. I mean, we should remember that for more than a decade, the enlargement question was dragging on to the frustration, basically, of the Western Balkan countries who really tried to prepare, who really tried to keep their populations enthusiastic about Europe. Some of the governments even paid high prices, like in North Macedonia. They were voted out, the pro-Europeans. So enlargement has been a really neglected issue lately, and now it comes up with a lot of force. And I think also for our panel that we need to draw lessons from the challenges the last enlargement brought to the European Union. And here I think there is basically a consensus that the enlargement in 2004 was economically a success, but politically the results are very controversial. We have very polarized societies in Central and Eastern Europe. We have a disintegrated party system in almost all the states. We have strong right-wing populism. We have violation of rule of law in some of the states. So I think the problem with the last enlargement was not the enlargement itself, of course, which it meant the reunification of Europe. But the problem was that the West told it as a story of victory. And it was not a story of victory for the countries who came into the European Union. It was rather a painful story that created winners and losers. And I think for this, many of the countries were not so prepared. So we should take into consideration that the transition in the 90s, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, the transition was marked by a neoliberal model of capitalism and capitalist transition, and that created a lot of losers in the countries who came into the European Union. And there's a direct line in my interpretation from this form of transition and from the losers to the right-wing vote we have together. This is something we can discuss, of course. So, I mean, it resulted in my interpretation in a crisis of the rule of law for the European Union. And today, or in the meantime, it's accompanied by an aggressive Russian campaign to contribute to the disintegration of individual societies and the European Union. So the new round of enlargement has to draw lessons of the 2004 enlargement. The decision-making reforms must be discussed in the European Union. That's what we want to do here. And I think there needs to be defined a new balance between the economic and the political side of enlargement, in having in mind what the last enlargement was like. So far, I would like now to ask Anna Lührmann, who comes back from a trip to Ukraine and Moldova, I think, to briefly set the stage. And then we will not have, as in the other panels, introductory statements, but then we go directly into the debate among the panelists. Please, Anna, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, I just came back from a trip in the Weimar Triangle format to Kiev, Odessa, and Chisinau. And it was really a very moving trip. Yeah, let me share some thoughts on it. First, it was in the Weimar Triangle format, and I think it's very clear that the Weimar Triangle has actually gained influence and importance now. And therefore, I spent a lot of time with my Polish colleague during the last days, and we talked a lot about the impact of enlargement on Poland. So I have to really contradict you in your opening remarks, because it's clear that for Poland, this is a remarkable success story. And yes, there are issues, also with social cohesion, of course, with right-wing populism. But I think we always have to ask the question, what if? Yeah? What if there hadn't been enlargement? Where would these countries stand now? And we can look to countries in the region that had not had the fortune of being integrated into the European Union this quickly after the fall of the Iron Curtain, Belarus, Moldova, the Western Balkans. We see where these countries stand now, and we see where those that had the fortune of being integrated into the European Union decisively at this early stage, where they stand now. And I think we see a stark difference. Yes, there are issues, and I think first and foremost, we also have to tell ourselves as European Union that we were not good enough in saying stop to derogations from the rule of law in Poland and in Hungary when they started occurring. So for me, one of the lessons of the last years is that we have to improve our instruments to address rule of law violations early on and be more decisive about that. We have to address indeed the question of social cohesion in a better way. Maybe we can talk a bit more about that, also in making the Green Deal socially more acceptable and just. But I don't think that the enlargement is a cause of rise of right-wing populism that we are seeing in Europe. On the contrary, I think economically the whole of the EU would be much worse off if we hadn't done enlargement. So just to set the stage here on this issue. Then it was a trip of the Weimar Triangle, but France was only represented with the ambassadors present in the countries, because of course our colleague Jean-Noël Barrot is active in election campaigning. So there we also see a bit the response to your first question. Yes, France is busy now with internal issues instead of providing all its support to EU policies, EU foreign policy and EU enlargement policy, as we've seen so impressively over the last 2 years with the highlight of President Macron's speech in Bucharest a year ago, or Budapest, no, where was it? In Bratislava a year ago, where he said clearly that the center of Europe is rather in this region than further west, and that the countries clearly belong into the EU. So other than that, the impressions from the trip, well, it's clear for me again when you are in Ukraine, when you are in Moldova, that these countries belong into the EU. They are, in terms of values, in terms of culture, they are part and parcel of our community. I've been to Odessa, also been in the impressive opera house there, where you can really see that also already over decades there was this integration of this sphere, and this is really something that also Ukrainians fight to protect now, their own culture, the right to their own culture, and the right to live free of Russian oppression. So for me, it's clear our place is in supporting them, is in giving this perspective towards the EU. And everywhere we went, the perspective that finally on Tuesday we will open accession negotiations with Moldova, with Ukraine, has been greeted as a beacon of hope that a better future is possible. And also, of course, it's a sign of accomplishment also for the governments in Ukraine and Moldova, that despite the brutal war that Russia has launched on Ukraine and the hybrid war that Russia is launching on Moldova, these governments were able to have an impressive reform agenda implemented. In Moldova at the moment with the justice sector reform, vetting of judges, it's going on in a very controversial way. It's very challenging for societies to go that way. But again, we can see that in the end, this path to the European Union leads also to a better societies for people in those countries themselves. Because if you have a justice sector that is free of corruption, judges that you can rely on, this is yes, a criteria of EU accession, but also will make everyday life for citizens better, will create a better investment climate. While I was there was also a delegation of 60 German businesses. They want to invest in Moldova, but they have questions, of course, about the rule of law and about the security of their investment. So therefore, yeah, I'm fully convinced that this is the right path because it will make our union more secure and stronger. We've been going on this path, and in parallel, we need to reform ourselves to get ready for enlargement. This is what Tiago and I have been working on a lot, and the European Council on Monday and Tuesday, again, I think will decide that these tracks need to go in parallel, and will decide on a very ambitious reform roadmap to that end.
Yeah, thank you. I think our positions do not contradict so much, because I obviously agree with you that it is economically a big success, and there was practically no alternative in the 90s but to do it in 2004 in this way. Nevertheless, I would keep up that the West has little understanding for what the countries have gone through, their citizens, and that this winner-loser paradigm is subconsciously shaping large parts of the debate there. But anyway, let me come to Tudor, because you're coming from a country that wants to join. So please comment on your expectations a little bit, and then maybe also on the result of the survey. Do you also think that in this new legislature of the Union, it will be more difficult to defend your interest?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Anna, for the encouragement and for the visit to Moldova and Ukraine. First of all, I would like also to set the stage and to say that, in my opinion, an imperfect European integration is much better than a perfect non-integration. So, having said that, and relating to the results of the very diversified survey that we just had today, I would still like to come with a very strong message that the top priority for Moldova and the best option is to advance towards the European integration. And the event, the intergovernmental conference that will start just in a couple of days on June 25, will set the framework, will approve the framework, and will officially launch the negotiating process. So that is extremely important. At the same time, we do not have the luxury of pausing or being complacent and think that, well, once we start, it's much easier to start a process than to finish it or to actually progress. And here we're reaching to the actual domestic reform process, which is extremely challenging because, yes, on one hand, there is a maybe partial lack of enough capacity to fully implement the reforms which are necessary, and especially in the justice sector reform, which Anna has referred to, the vetting, the pre-vetting system of the justices. It's extremely difficult. Yes, on one hand, the lack of enough human capacity. On the second half, we have the existing, let's call, corrupt system or remnants of the previous corrupt systems. So you have to expect a rupture or a fracture in the changing process. But at the same time, it's not possible to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. So we have to apply different norms. With regards to the hybrid war elements that the Russian Federation is aggressively implementing in the Republic of Moldova, particularly that is affecting the media campaign following the European parliamentary elections, that we have seen, and I have seen it personally, that there are information propaganda elements that are being thrown in the media, saying that, well, the new format of the European Union leadership at the parliamentary level is actually going to slower the process of European integration for the Republic of Moldova. On one hand, that creating or setting the stage psychologically, but on the other hand, this is also fueled indirectly by the recent statement from the incoming EU presidency, the Hungarian presidency. So in this context, it's extremely important, and my advice, of course, to the current leadership of the Republic of Moldova is not to stop, first of all. And, you know, the best response to any propaganda are results. Results, indicators, change, gradual change that has to be implemented. We do see a challenging process for the government, because this government is coming from a civil society representation, and there is also a need to fully engage the professionals that are going to actually be delivering on the negotiating chapters, because the decision to launch negotiations is a political one, or geopolitical, having in mind the tragic trigger of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, but now it's the actual work of professionals that have to do the work. And yes, Brussels, and not only Brussels, Berlin, Bucharest, of course, Romania is the best friend that Moldova can hope for its European integration path, and we need to receive stronger signals from our friends in the European Union.
So a hopeful picture. Thank you very much in a difficult situation you're in. We stay for a moment in the region, and I would go to Ruxandra asking first, what do your people think about the enlargement? What do the Romanians, not the Romanian government maybe, but what do the Romanians think about enlargement?
Yes, we are lucky to have a very broad consensus over enlargement, both within political parties and at the level of society. As you said, Romania wants to be the best friend of the Republic of Moldova, and I think the entire Romanian society is in favor of enlargement, both towards Moldova and Ukraine, and to the Western Balkans. One of the reasons that would explain this positive feeling is that Romania was also kept at the gates for a very long time. We entered the European Union in 2007 after important efforts, and we are still not full members of the Schengen area. We are still waiting for a decision, hopefully this year, for the land borders to be also included in our Schengen agreement. So we understand very well the frustration that exists both at the level of the Western Balkans, but also in Moldova and Ukraine, where this process of a European perspective for those countries has been given for a long time. And, well, a few things happened before the recent decisions to speed up the process. So I think that Romania is in a particularly favorable constellation from this point of view. We benefited from enlargement and from our European membership, and these benefits are visible today because we have an important economic growth rate during the last several years, and I think that you see the development, the economic development of the societies, of the Romanian society as a result of the European funds coming in. And also we have managed to stop the evolution of the extreme rights during the recent elections. So for once in its post-communist history, Romania, I think, is in a very good situation nowadays.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to go to Tiago next and then come to you as a parliamentarian, Thijs. Tiago, I mean, this enlargement can't function like the last ones. So the Union needs to reform internally to be kept operational. And maybe you could give us a little bit of an idea what you think, where the reforms should be in the European Union to be able to absorb new members.
Yeah, thank you. So you might find it strange that in a panel about enlargement, and enlargement will happen to the east and to the Western Balkans, you find someone coming from the westernmost point of Europe, from Portugal. But yes, but indeed, as a matter of fact, it makes sense, because on the one hand, enlargement is in the interest of, obviously, the candidate countries, but it is in the interest of the whole European Union. And secondly, the impacts of enlargement will be felt throughout the entire Union. And so we always have to consider the two sides of the coin. The preparation that the candidate countries need to make in order to comply with the well-known Copenhagen criteria, and we're always very demanding and very rigorous on that, and rightly so. And this is a heavy workload and homework for the candidate countries. Tudor has mentioned a bit about that. But then also the homework on our part in order to prepare for enlargement. And that's something that we've been always stressing. In my previous capacity, together with Anna and with Pasquale there as well, we were working a lot on the reforms, internal reforms that the EU will have to undergo in order to be able to absorb new member states. And that's where I think also we need to learn from past enlargements, which were overall a success. But European Union had to also, there was this debate about widening and deepening, and the reform pace came at a slower pace than enlargement. So we enlarged first, and then we had to, well, you all know the traumatic experience that led first this attempt to have a European constitution, then it led to the Treaty of Lisbon. So now I'm not advocating for treaty change because that's very difficult, but we do need to reform. We need to reform our budget because enlargement is a priority. It is an imperative for several reasons, but it will have a cost. It will not be cost-free, and we should not have the illusion that there will not be a price tag on enlargement. So we need to adapt our budget, and we need to make sure that these new priorities, enlargement on the one hand, but also defense and security, competitiveness, etc., are not made at the cost of other policies, important policies such as cohesion policy and the common agriculture policy. So there we probably will need also to make some reforms, particularly considering the impact that Ukraine's accession, for instance, will have on the agriculture market in Europe. So in terms of our big policies, we will need to also reform them, probably. And then also the institutional aspects. In order to maintain our capacity to act, we know that nowadays it is already oftentimes very difficult to decide at 27, imagine at 30 plus. So in our decision-making processes, we also need to change some things in order to make sure that as we enlarge, as we have more member states, that will not lead to more blockages or situations in which we are unable to act. And then also, as you already mentioned, on the rule of law, we need to ensure that there is, obviously the Copenhagen criteria mean that we are very demanding in terms of rule of law standards in order to get in, but then we need to ensure there is no backsliding. We've seen that in some member states in the past, so we need also, or we should be able to reform and improve our rule of law mechanisms, our rule of law toolbox, in order to ensure that we have the ability to prevent that backsliding in terms of compliance with fundamental rights, with rule of law standards. So these are the main areas. They are easy to identify, much more difficult to then be able to agree on what needs to be reformed, but we need to start that process. And I'm very happy that since the Granada Declaration, and then several times it has been echoed by the leaders, these two processes must run in parallel. And they should be synchronized. I mean, the enlargement negotiations, and I'm very happy that we'll have the first intergovernmental conference with Ukraine and Moldova next week. So the enlargement needs to go ahead, the negotiations, but also we need to start immediately working on the reforms and on agreeing what needs to be changed, so that ideally both the candidate countries and the EU are ready by the time of accession. So this time around, we should be able to reform before or at the same time as we enlarge, and not leave it for, after enlargement, which would make the reform process much more difficult.
Yeah, thank you for outlining kind of a roadmap of internal reforms in the European Union to be ready to have new members. Thijs, you're in a new parliament, newly composed parliament. Perhaps you can tell us first how high on the agenda in the parliament will be enlargement. And then a question that goes to you first from my side, but then everybody else could also comment on this. In my perception, one of the results of the election is that we will not so much have a problem in the parliament, but we will have a problem in the council and in the commission, because there are some governments who might send some strange commissioners. Yeah, so please, you start with...
You're taking the words out of my mouth, because I wanted to get back to your question to the audience on this as well, because I think your question was good, but I think that the answer should be that the problem is not in the European Parliament. It was not in the European Parliament in the previous mandate, and it's not going to be in this mandate, because there's still 450 plus seats very much in favor of enlargement, advocating also for all the things that we have written down just before the elections in a report on AFCO and AFET together, which merges the need to reform, but also the need for enlargement, the swift enlargement, reconfirming also the ambition of the European Parliament before 2030, etc., etc. So I think the problem is more the elections in several member states that continuously keep us busy, continuously are distracting us, because there's now an election going on there, so we should be careful with this or that country. So I think the problem is more with the member states. What is the role then of the European Parliament in the next mandate? Well, I think also what we have been doing in the past years, saying that we basically lost 5, maybe 10 years. And in the past mandate, we lost these 5 years because of a dysfunctional commissioner from the wrong member state. It was the wrong cast for this function. So my ambition, because I look to the future, is that we get a strong commissioner that is actually really going to enhance this policy. I think it needs to be someone of high stature. Obviously not from the country where the current commissioner is coming from. I'm also a little bit more skeptical, but that's me because I'm a parliamentarian, so I can say that some people have to still work closely with the presidency coming in, but I'm very skeptical about this presidency. As you know, the European Parliament has tried a year ago to move the Council to take measures with regard to the Hungarian presidency. Well, we have to see what we are getting, but the picture with the first the coming 6 months does not look very good. But I don't want to put too much pressure on that, because I think that we need to look at the broader picture. That means this strong new commissioner, full commitment, and not these continuously repeated sentences after these summits with the enlargement countries. Yes, we unequivocally support blah, blah. That needs to stop. We need to see serious and full commitment. And thirdly, stop the detrimental appeasement policy, appeasement towards autocrats in particular the Western Balkan region, which also connects obviously with our most prominent adversaries in this, and that is the Russian influence. Because the more space we leave, every week that we wait responding genocide denial, responding this practice of escalating to de-escalate, in particular from President Vučić, but also responding to the disinformation that is being spilled over a country like Moldova with bucket load every day. We need to stop this. We need to stop this appeasement policy towards this kind of things and take a strong stand. So, well, to set the scene also from my side.
I mean, it's a clear position. You as a parliamentarian can certainly say that.
And may I say that also because Minister Lührmann was just in the region in Moldova and Ukraine. I had the pleasure to visit Moldova 3 times in the past mandate. And the dedication with which both countries, but let me take Moldova as an example, because Ukraine obviously has done all this progress to get to the negotiations over fighting a war for keeping its freedom, but also Moldova. The kind of approach that they took was interesting because they said, look, we are not going to overpromise and then underperform. The Prime Minister, for example, said to a delegation of the European Parliament, look, I am saying you now that we cannot meet this and this deadline, but we will do it. And I think that the same commitment has to come from the European Union. I want to see that spirit of just after the fall of the Berlin Wall here in Berlin. I want to see that spirit, not the spirit of promising and then underperforming, no, the spirit of we are going to do this. That was the spirit of the 90s. We are going to do this no matter the cost. No matter the cost. And I want to see that spirit again.
Anna.
Yeah,
I mean, this is, I think, perhaps you can react to it, but
yes,
perhaps you also dare to say something about the future relationship between Parliament, Council, and Commission.
Yeah, but let me maybe first respond first, because I think what you're saying is absolutely right. We need to move in the enlargement policy from this sort of a bit benevolent, or you may join when you're ready, to it's in our strategic interest that you join. We'll do everything we can to support you so that you meet the criteria. So I'm fully on board with this. There needs to be a different mindset, and to be honest, I'm seeing this mindset at least in most national governments and in parts of the Commission. So this is really something that we have to do. But on the other hand, you also contradicted yourself. Because if you say, sort of, if you put all the blame at the European institutions and saying we've been too slow, we've been not fast enough, at the same time you said, but we have to be clearer vis-à-vis Serbia, that's a little contradiction here. Because I fully agree with both things that you said, actually, and saying also that we need to take a clearer stance vis-à-vis Serbia. We've been doing this, actually, as German government, and also clearly pointing out that it's unacceptable that there are elections taking place in a country that wants to join the EU and that are so heavily criticized by international observers. That's very clear. But that also shows that it's not only the EU's fault that the Western Balkan hasn't made more progress yet, or individual countries at least, because if you look particularly to Serbia, then we see a government in place that doesn't put all its eggs into the baskets of joining the EU. And I think as EU, we also need to be mindful in not turning a blind eye on this, as you said. So therefore, it is both. It is the stage where we are at with the Western Balkans in particular. Yes, EU has made mistakes, has been too slow, particularly when we look to North Macedonia, for instance. But if we look to Serbia, then I think we can clearly also have to say the responsibility is there. Because if there would be political will in Serbia, they could join very, very fast. The level of administrative capacity is there. But we see a government that constantly take steps away from the EU.
But there's no contradiction, I think, there, because I'm not really loved in Serbia either, because I'm a great friend of the Serbian people and of Serbian accession under the right conditions. But this government is clearly doing the opposite. They're telling one story in Brussels, and then back in Belgrade they tell a different story. But I fully agree with Anna Lührmann that we need to balance this position out and be more distinctive in how we respond. It's not just the Western Balkans. No, there are different countries there. And I took also Moldova as an example when I was speaking to Bosnian interlocutors. Because let's take Bosnia, for example. I mean, I also want Bosnia to proceed on the path. But I said to them sometimes, I said, well, be careful, Moldova might join before you.
Yeah, but that leads me to a question on top of the debate we have, and Tudor is next then. Aren't you afraid that there will be a competition between Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and the Western Balkans? Because but the Western Balkan countries are fundamentally frustrated. I mean, we all know that. Yeah. So the pressure now comes through the war. Yeah. The whole issue comes up because we need a new policy on Russia, which we don't have. Yeah. Yet. Yeah? So maybe you can take this aspect into consideration.
Yep, thank you for giving this easy question. So, and thank you, Thijs, for actually provoking us to the discussion. I really appreciate that. So, number one, definitely, I actually disagree with all the respect that European Parliament cannot do more than they can today, comparing to the Commission. They should, and I think that they should play a very important role.
They will.
Not only politically, but actually with actionable items, number one. Number two, with regards to the regional competition, let's be frank, when there was no regional competition, first of all. Even though I do believe, and I'm a strong believer of a stronger regionalism and regional approach, but at the same time, there are some principles and the criteria, of course, that we have to actually follow and provide results. Number three, we had the first round of European elections, and there is a second round which will take place in Washington, D.C. on November 5. Yeah. We'll have to see the results of those elections. And then there is a third round for Moldova's case. We have the presidential elections on October 20, and we have the parliamentary elections next year in June or July. And this is where the question actually comes, and may I ask you to see the things from the perspective of the people in the Republic of Moldova, in my particular case. When they hear about European integration, the overall majority of the society, they are in favor of that. At the same time, when there is too much rhetoric that, well, we are integrating, and there is a contradiction with the pace of the reforms. So the feeling of the society is delayed of the narrative.
That's it. Yeah.
And this is where the discrepancy comes. And this is when do we see the discrepancy? When elections happen. And of course, elections are always an opportunity for some friends from outside to intervene and help hijack the European integration course. And that's where the friends from the real friends are trying to balance it. So it's not boring in the Republic of Moldova from that perspective. But also, I think it's extremely important to focus, to think globally and act locally. This is a principle. But in my country particularly, this is especially important because it becomes more and more difficult to sell, in the good sense, to sell the idea of European integration advantages to the society. Of course, post-COVID financial crisis, this has affected. So we need to strengthen from the grassroots level so the people, they are voting not with their empty pockets or with no food on the table. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but they're voting on the principles. And the principles are there. We just need to make sure that governments or those who are in the ruling positions, they actually also focus on the change on the ground.
On the ground, yeah.
Because sometimes there is a discrepancy, there is a very rosy or pink image outside, which is of course beneficial for the country in terms of harnessing the support from the European Union bilaterally or as a union. But also there is a contrast with the macroeconomic indicators in the country, with addition to the democracy, rule of law, and media freedom. And there is one final aspect that I want to mention. In the context of the hybrid war and the illegal invasion of Russian Federation in Ukraine, yes, we do see the elements of propaganda and more interference in domestic affairs in the Republic of Moldova, and definitely strengthening the security in the larger sense, the progressive security dimension in Moldova. It's important, but also it has to come on a very, very thin line or a narrow line with the basic human rights and the media freedom and the because you have to, and it's a very challenging decision for any government to make, right, in the context of a war that happens just across the border. How far you go on the domestic freedom so people do not feel violated from their rights, but also they feel protected from the security point of view.
A bigger question even in Ukraine. But I would want to remind us of time, so I would like to take Ruxandra and Tiago one more time, and then we open to you for questions. Would you come in with a comment on the latest debate we have here, Ruxandra?
Yes, yes. My first intervention was actually very optimistic.
Yeah.
And now I will provide a rather more pessimist take on the future of this debate. Enlargement versus deepening, because yes, enlargement needs to be accompanied by a reform of the functioning of the European Union. but I'm afraid that the political context which we all evoked here in the member states, that is in the Council, in the Commission, and maybe less in the European Parliament, is not very favorable of a reform that is needed, that is precisely extending qualified majority voting. I don't believe that the Conservatives would agree to that because they express sovereignist, they are the expression of sovereignist tendencies inside the member states. So I think we all agree on the need to reform, but there will be much less consensus on the precise reforms that will be done. The reduction of the number of commissioners will also be a very strong point and widely debated. And then there's this danger that if we have a minor reform, the EU will become or will remain, I don't know how to say, only a common market, which is not what our progressive perspective wishes for. But on the other side, too much reform and too high ambitions for this reform might lead to an implosion and to more far-right sovereignism in a way. So this is, I think, a very difficult and delicate issue that the political forces will need to address. And then, hoping that the enlargement will take place in the horizon of 2030, as it has been said, I think that we should be prepared to address a kind of cultural gap. Maybe it's a lot to say, but as you mentioned in your introduction, the 2004-2007 enlargement has shown some different perspectives of the so-called new Europe. And I'm referring here to the fact that new member states have been gladly supported American positions in international affairs, which were different from the Western European positions and so on.
Rumsfeld, new and old Europe.
Yes, yes. And also the danger of a democratic backlash in the former communist countries, which we have seen in Poland, Hungary, Slovakia maybe a little bit, and well, I'm not sure if Romania will not follow suit in the future if these tendencies continue.
So. Yeah, thank you. Slightly more skeptical, I would say. Tiago, I mean, the roadmap is one thing. What's your take on the realization side, and where are the difficulties?
Yeah, so as all of you, I think, have been mentioning, national political realities might make it more difficult. I mean, enlargement is a European policy, it's a European imperative. We tend to discuss it on a European level, but then obviously there are national realities, and the Serbian one has been, both in the candidate countries and in the European Union. So the Serbian reality has been mentioned. The elections in Moldova will be key, will be decisive. In North Macedonia, we decided that they would need to undergo a second amendment to the constitution, which in the current political landscape will be very, very difficult to happen. So yeah, there are challenges. And then within the European Union, obviously, we see some elections ahead that might bring some political forces into power that might be skeptical of enlargement, and also skeptical of the reform process that we need to undergo. So there are quite a few number of, so now going from the more optimistic side to the more, to the challenges ahead. Yes, this will not be easy. And then there is also the challenge of public opinion. Both in the candidate countries, for instance, Serbia, in most candidate countries, people are very much supportive of European integration, but that is not so much the case anymore in Serbia, in which the public support for European integration has been dropping considerably. And then also within the European Union, we need to make sure that the public opinion is for enlargement and is for reform. So far, I guess they're not aware of so much of this reform debate, but at some point we cannot have, these are major reforms to how the European Union works, and to aspects that will have a major impact in every member state, on every European citizen, so we cannot have this discussion on the back of the citizens. So at some point we need to involve the citizens. But then there is the issue of, if we start talking about the impacts in the budget, changing from unanimity to QMV, etc., this might scare people away from the process. And so it could lead to a backlash. So we need to have a debate on how to address these issues, how to bring these issues to a public debate broader than this one, because there's also a key challenge there. So, yeah, the path will not be easy, but this is clearly the path that we need to go. And there's, as progressives, there is, it's our task to help this process go forward. I don't have all the answers, far from that, but we need to be involved in this, and also because this is a priority in the midst of many other European priorities, and we also have to make sure that this does not fall into a second category as we address obviously very important challenges as regarding to the security landscape and the need to reinforce our defense policy, etc. We need to keep pushing for enlargement and for also the other side of it, which is the reform process.
Yeah, thank you. So from the panel, optimistic skepticism. Now let's open to you. Are there questions or statements? We are one of the large panels in the event, so it might have taken a little more time. And I ask you to be short and precise if you have questions or remarks. Please. Yeah, Anlinde, and then we go there and there. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Anne-Linda from FEPS, former foreign minister. I have a question towards Tiago and a little bit to Anna said, because maybe Thijs also, that we need to do this now. We need to tell everybody it's important for geopolitical situation. But the fact is that if you go to nearly any of our countries, you have a divide. Those who are working in the foreign affairs, security policy, defense, 100% for it. Those who work in finance ministry, economy, and justice, they are not so much for it. And so you have to breach the divide both inside the countries and then with those who are on the not progressive side, who are against it for migration issues and so on. And I think we have been too rosy. I mean, when we were discussing visa liberalization with Georgia, I was State Secretary of Justice, and I was skeptical. Because what we said is that we will have a lot of people coming to our country. They will ask for asylum, and during that time, there will be heightened criminality. And then, when I moved to Foreign Affairs Minister, I totally changed my mind. And what happened was that when there was visa liberalization, there was a high level risen in criminality. It was going around taking boats. Well, it doesn't matter what it was. And what we did then was to start to cooperate with the Georgian government, who really took this issue seriously. And we cooperated with the police, and so on and so forth. And now it's fixed. I mean, it's not a problem anymore. But the people felt that we were telling them lies. We say it's not going to be a problem, and there were a problem. But if we say that there is going to be a problem, that could also be seen as prejudice against another country and another people. So it's so difficult. So we politicians, we stay silent. And I think that this is one of the problems in the discussion of the enlargement, that how in a positive way can we admit, yes, there are going to be problems, it's going to cost money, there is going to be a problem, without being either too rosy or prejudiced. How are we going to have that dialogue? It's not easy.
That was more an experience than properly a question, but you can comment on it, obviously.
Well, I mean,
let's take the two other ones and then we do it in one round. The lady, there.
Hey, my name is Guanza. I'm from Transparency International, but right now I want to, first of all, thank you for an interesting discussion, and some of these topics have already been touched upon. My question is more to stay with Georgia again, from Georgia's case specifically, and maybe to some extent Serbia, what you mentioned also qualifies. I see this as a dilemma and a challenge with the current events in Georgia and the situation with government backlash towards everything that they've been at least formally working on for the past 10 years. Meanwhile, there's still wide support in the population, and particularly in the population, younger population towards EU. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are regarding ensuring that the population stays motivated to the extent that they still vote whenever this is a question that what do you support, do you support EU integration or not, that they stay motivated and the frustration is not used by more populist parts of the political parties that, okay, you see, they don't want us either, and this is why we need to look for alternative, but at the same time have really some type of response to what government has been doing, so that it's also helpful to the local civil society and to
the pro-European,
pro-European movements. And I'm saying this also as part of this movement as well, because I also understand that impeaching also and just continuing business as usual is not a solution, because then they're population also sees that, they were not serious with the statements, and so nobody will come to our support.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And there was a lady here. I think that's the last comment for now then.
Thank you so much. Also, thank you very much to the panelists. It was a very insightful and thought-provoking discussion. You were mentioning we have to go for EU enlargement no matter the cost, and I absolutely agree with you. I want to make that clear. But at the same time, I think we have to be very mindful and particularly strategic about the costs as well. And that brings me a little bit to the elephant in the room, because I don't think that EU enlargement is in the interest of Russia. And Russian information warfare is not. It also has this pollution of the information environment, but most of the time it is really amplifying already existing social tensions within societies. And so my question comes to, how are we overcoming these challenges, particularly regarding the Russian minorities and the countries that are certainly going to be instrumentalized by Putin's regime? And how to tackle those challenges. And then I would also like to ask, given the fact that Ukraine and Moldova, and maybe also Georgia, or not maybe, Georgia is much more experienced in information warfare against Russia, what can EU countries looking to the recent elections learn from you? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think let's start with Ann Linde's question, which was directly going to you, Anna, and to Tiago.
Yeah.
So you start.
Yeah, I think, Ann, as always, you've pointed out exactly the challenging question that we need to address. I think as politicians in general, and I think that doesn't, and as progressive politicians, and I think that doesn't apply only to enlargement policies, we need to find a better balance between sort of talking about our vision, our goals, and at the same time being realistic about it. Because if we just sort of paint a too rosy picture, then people just think, okay, well, I'm not going to believe that anyway. So I always, like, one of the most inspiring quotes comes actually from our Vice Chancellor, Robert Habeck. He said once, wir erzählen den Leuten keinen Scheiß. Yeah? All the German speakers are laughing, so basically means we don't bullshit people. Yeah? And I think that should be our mindset when we talk about political communication, because what is the far right doing currently? What is the populists? What are they doing? They are basically saying, well, there are easy solutions to everything. Yeah, the war in Ukraine can end just if Ukraine stops fighting. Where there will be no migration because we'll just close our borders. And as progressives, we know the reality is not as simple. And I think we shouldn't, sort of, our response to far-right populism shouldn't be to try to paint a rosy picture and say, oh, we have the solution and then everything will be fine, no struggles. But we should talk to our voters, to our citizens as adults, and really engage in a serious conversation about how challenging this world has been. Because as you said, Russia does not have an interest in us succeeding. The warfare that Russia is doing hybridly against the EU and countries like Moldova, and really actively against Ukraine at the moment, that aims at the very way of how we are living, because that's what's the threat to Russia. That Russian population sees that around them, and that in countries like Georgia, like Ukraine, like Moldova, democracy, market economy works. For the better of the people. That's the challenge, yeah? And therefore they're doing everything they can to undermine enlargement policy, to undermine also cohesion in our societies, to instrumentalize Russian minorities, to challenge us. And therefore I think we need to be aware of this, the threat that we're under, and really be much more focused on how to communicate better. I think as progressive politicians in general, we're spending not enough time in thinking about how we communicate our actions. Rather, we think and we fight about the details of how we do it. Yeah, but I think we need to think more about how we do it. And when it comes to enlargement policies, I mean, it's clear also the costs of, for instance, supporting Ukraine. I think actually, to be honest, they will be very much similar, no matter if Ukraine is on the path toward the EU, or if we just sort of continue with our policies to supporting Ukraine anyhow. I mean, we just had the Ukraine Recovery Conference here in Berlin, and it's very much, it's along the same lines. We need stable government institutions, stable rule of law in Ukraine anyway. And we might as well do it to support them on the way to Ukraine. This will be challenging, but I'm very much convinced, and we need to tell that more, that the way into the EU will actually make the costs for our citizens actually lower, because it's more stable. And just to bring one more, sorry, I've been talking quite a lot now, but just to bring one more example. You know, the Polish discussion with Ukraine about the exports of agricultural goods. Yeah? I've been talking a lot now with my Polish colleague about it, and now I think I finally understood their issue. Because currently, sort of what we're doing is that Ukraine can export at least some agricultural goods without fulfilling EU standards. The way, once we bring Ukraine closer to the EU, the idea is that also they fulfill the same standards as Polish farmers, as European farmers are fulfilling. Thus, it makes it more just also for our farmers when we don't just say, okay, they can export their goods, but they also at the same time have to fulfill the same standards that we do, and the same rule of law measures are applied. So I think that's the key. And just one sentence to Georgia, because I've been talking too much. I think we can perfectly message to say Georgia's place is in the European Union. If you continue reform path, the accession negotiations will continue, but now this government has chosen to go the opposite route. Thus, accession talks, of course, are not progressing at the moment, but as soon as the government of Georgia is back on reform track, we will continue with this work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I do agree that we need to be very clear and very honest about the challenges and the impact of enlargement. And in the past, in my previous capacity representing Portugal in the General Affairs Council, I was always very blunt about the challenges and therefore the need to reform. And initially, this was perceived as Portugal being skeptical about the enlargement or wanting to put some roadblocks in the process or slowing down the process. And I kept explaining, I guess at some point people understood that, no, this is not about creating problems to the enlargement. This is exactly because we want enlargement. We need to prepare for it, otherwise it will be a mess. So, and in order to prepare for it, we need to address the difficult issues. We need to talk about the challenges, and there are significant challenges ahead, but avoiding those, because during some time, there was not a lot of appetite to discuss the difficult issues. But just, you know, mentioning the how we want enlargement and then not going into the nitty-gritty of the difficult reforms that we need to undertake in order to make it possible, this is not a good way to go. So yeah, we need to be honest about the difficulties, and we need to start addressing them. And we need to be honest towards public opinion, as I was mentioning earlier. But you're also right. Within governments, there are also different visions. And obviously, there are line ministries which are much more concerned with the impact on, you know, the amount of funds coming from the European Union or the impact in agriculture policy, etc. So with the national impacts. But again, there's a task for us. We need to, within the governments, convince other ministers and in the society convince people also by talking about two things. First, the success story of former enlargements, in which all of these issues were there as well, the challenges were there as well, and we've managed to weather those impacts. And overall, it was a success for the whole of Europe. And also the cost of non-enlargement. Because not moving to enlargement will also have a cost, and it will increase the frustration, the feeling of frustration, and this obviously will increase the space for Russia to intervene and to with their propaganda and information machine. And this will destabilize the region. So there are overwhelming reasons for which we do actually indeed need and will gain from enlargement. This might not be so easily seen by whoever is just concerned with the bread and butter issues, but we need to explain why this matters also for each member state.
We've been given a sign. We have 5 minutes
I noticed,
left.
That's
now.
why
it's okay.
Shut up.
I say it again. I mean, we are one of the large panels. It's easier to do this with 3 on the panel, but we wanted to have you. So we now go to Tudor and then obviously to Thijs and to you, Ruxandra, again. I mean, you pick from what you want to comment on, yeah, so that we can give a satisfactory answer.
Thank you. Well, we don't pick when we integrate into the European Union, but I will pick today. So very quickly on the question, I think it was a very interesting question with regards to how to engage the youngsters particularly, but also with regards to how to address the too much populism. Right? So when we see from inside the countries, accession countries, and in this case Moldova or the region as well, we see when the governments, the pro-European governments, they come to power, they go too far on the, well, they have to, of course, campaigning, but they go too far on the populist side, creating too much expectation domestically, and then when it comes to the actual reality, it goes down, and then what we see kind of a pendulum, right? Pro-Western government, or anti-Western government, right? And it's not healthy for society, first of all. Why? Because this continuously is dividing society. When you see the social polls, it's mostly 45, 55, so it's very tight, right? So it's a reality we have to address. I have seen this a lot, and that's why I think it's important to manage expectations on one side, but also, of course, to deliver, because delivery is the best response to anything. But too much populism is not good in my opinion, for European integration process, because this actually leads to the second question that you have asked about the Russian way of interfering and how they work with the ethnic groups, with the Russian-speaking communities. And more recently, I have started actually to go to Russian news channels in Moldova, and there are plenty of those, trust me. And not necessarily all those Russian speakers, right? They are anti-Europe. They're more actually in the context of Ukraine and the Russian invasion in Ukraine. They are anti-Putin and Kremlin policy, but nobody is talking to them. Right? So because the Russians are not working, or any propaganda war machine is not working with those who are 100% pro-European. You know, we are here clearly positioned. It's those, the pool of voters who are in between, and those are the target of the propaganda and disinformation. And this is where the government has to work economically, market economy, but also working on the ethnic, on their rights in the society and so forth. And once you start talking to them, they feel engaged and they feel a part of a process. And this is where you can go from populism to actual political engagement and therefore help us all enlarge European Union.
Yeah, not a very theoretical but very practical contribution. Thank you very much. Ruxandra, and then our parliamentarian gets the last word.
Yes, concerning enlargement and whether or not countries are prepared to join the EU, I think, well, in the 2004-2007 enlargement, they were not ready either. So I believe that sometimes form precedes content, and that this is precisely the way the European Union has been constructed, because we never actually, since 1951, we never actually knew exactly where we were going. It was built by doing, in a way. So I think we probably...
It's like a bike. If you stop, it falls down.
Yes. We probably should do this together with the future members, having a discussion about how and where we want to lead this political project. And then I agree with everybody who stated here that we need to be very honest among ourselves. The EU needs to be honest with the candidate countries about their prospects. The candidate countries need to be honest with the EU about their real problems, because I'm sure that there is quite little knowledge about some deep tendencies in these countries which are not very well known in Brussels. And of course, politicians need to be honest with the citizens and tell them which are the real implications of enlargement.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, building on Ruxandra, because if we would not have a European Union today, we would immediately build it, but we will build it much different than it is now, because we have learned from the past, hopefully. But I want to come back to Annelien's remark, because I think she's fully right. We need to come up with a better narrative, not trying to counter the other one's narrative, which is inevitably diluted, so to speak, because then we risk to fall into the trap. We risk to build on their false arguments or mixed arguments, populist arguments. We need to come with the better narrative. And I want to also draw from history, and also which was mentioned by Tiago, the previous accession rounds were not easy. Maybe we are living now in a new reality and think, yeah, Poland, huge success. It is. Poland is going to be a net contributor in a couple of years. And the Baltic countries, not to forget. But that was not easy. That was not easy. So we need to take our citizens along and say, no, it was never easy. It will never be easy. It will also not be easy for the new accession countries, because, yes, to take away every misunderstanding, they will need to fulfill the criteria, also the criteria that are important to our citizens, rule of law, democracy, not because we want it, no, because it's in their own interest. So that's why we need to build that story together. And on Georgia, because I've been very actively speaking out on Georgia, yes, Georgia has a couple of advantages over Serbia, because it has a very strong civil society, which is now also taking the lead in the protests. It has a little bit more open media climate, which fosters, of course, also a discussion. But yes, hope, and it will be on the agenda of the Foreign Affairs Council next week, I hope that the European Union will give that strong message that Anna also spoke about. I said that we had to preempt on sanctions towards Ivanishvili and his allies before adopting the Russian law to give a warning. But okay, that didn't happen. But I think that we need to come out strong in the line that Anna said. And last point, Chair, I think that one of the things, and I will end realistically, to surprise of you maybe, but I think it is realistic that 1 or 2 countries will join in this next mandate of the European Parliament. And I think it would be an important signal to everyone who is saying from the outside and from the inside, they don't want you. It would be an important signal to have 1 or 2 countries joining very soon. And I also want to take away this false contradiction between reforms and enlargement, because we need reforms anyway. Even without enlargement, we do need reforms, and the current treaties provide for certain reforms that can help us to at least take in these 1 or 2 countries as a signal that we are going to finish this project of peace. Because that what we started 75 years ago will need to be finished. This signal of rising populism is not the signal to hide under the table. No, it is a signal to do a step forward, and I think as progressives, we need to take the lead on that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Very good closing remarks.
Thank you for closing on a positive note.
Yeah.
So, but what we can take away from here, I think, is that communication is a key factor, and that we should be bold and clear and honest with our own people in the countries and at home. I thank you all for your patience and for your participation. I thank the panelists for their inputs, and now I think it's lunchtime. Thank you.
No.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
There will be lunch, don't worry. No, thank you very much to the panel, also at my end. And I would like to share with you that we've arrived to the last point on our agenda. And this will be the closing session, election time again. It will be taking place here, theoretically without a break, but we still have to wait for participants joining other groups to arrive here at the main stage. So let's wait for them, and we will be starting shortly with the closing session of the PGS 2024.